The story you're about to hear was based on real events. It gives you goosebumps. So, let's get started. The train station was less than a 5-minute walk from our house. Its presence was a constant in my life. The mournful whistles of departing trains, the rumbling vibrations that carried through our walls late at night, and the sharp scent of metal and oil that hung heavy in the air. My dad joked that we didn't need clocks, just listen for the 8:05. But the station was more than just a backdrop to my days. It was also the stage for my episodes. That's what my parents called them. Episodes. They started about a year ago, not long after I turned 14. At first, I just see things in the corner of my eye, shapes that darted away when I turned my head. Then they started lingering, watching. Tall, lanky figures with no faces, only black voids where features should be. The first time I told my mom, she got this look on her face. You know the kind. Concern mixed with barely disguised fear, like she didn't want to spook me. "It's just your imagination, Alex," she said, but her voice trembled. My dad was more direct. "You've got to get a handle on this, buddy. It's stress, plain and simple. Stress." That was their answer to everything. New school? Stress. No friends? Stress. The fact that I couldn't sleep because I felt those faceless figures hovering at the edge of my room? Stress. The therapist, Dr. Feynman, agreed. "Alex, you're experiencing visual hallucinations," he said during one of our sessions. "Your mind is playing tricks on you. It's not unusual for someone your age, especially under pressure." He handed me a prescription, pills to keep the shadows at bay. They helped, for a while. But the thing about pills is they don't fix everything. And they didn't stop the figures from returning. I saw one again last night, standing near the station. I was on the back porch, staring into the dusk, when it appeared beneath the faint orange glow of the platform's lamplight. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, and opened them again. Still there. I tried to remind myself of what Dr. Feynman had said. These are hallucinations. They aren't real. But then the figure turned, slowly, and walked toward the train tracks. There was something about the way it moved, jittery, almost stuttering like a film reel missing frames, that made my skin crawl. It disappeared into the shadows near the tracks, and I shivered. I told myself I wouldn't look for it again. But as the night stretched on and the house grew silent, I couldn't help myself. I threw on a hoodie and crept out the door, leaving my parents asleep upstairs. The train station was only a block away, but the walk felt longer in the dark. My heart pounded with every step. When I reached the platform, the silence was deafening. The usual hum of distant trains was gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness. I hesitated at the edge of the platform, staring down the tracks. My breath came out in short, visible puffs in the cold air. And that's when I saw it again. The silhouette stood farther down the line this time, just barely illuminated by the dim light of a signal lamp. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me, even without eyes. "Go away," I whispered, my voice trembling. Didn't. Instead, it tilted its head, as if considering me. Then it raised an arm too long and pointed at me. I stumbled backward, nearly falling off the platform. My pulse thundered in my ears. When I looked again, it was gone. The train station lights flickered, and for a moment, I thought I could hear something. A faint scraping noise, like metal on metal. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I ran all the way home. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My dreams had been a tangle of flickering lights, distant whispers, and those black silhouettes reaching for me with impossibly long arms. I could still feel the chill of their presence, like frost creeping under my skin. At breakfast, I kept quiet. My mom chattered about her weekend plans, and my dad skimmed the newspaper, but I didn't say a word. They didn't notice, or maybe they just didn't want to ask. The day dragged. School felt like an afterthought, the hours ticking by in a haze. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, but something wouldn't let me rest. A gnawing curiosity, or maybe it was dread. Either way, the train station was calling me. I waited until after dinner, when my parents were parked in front of the TV half asleep. Grabbing a flashlight, I slipped out the back door and into the crisp night air. The station was quiet, just like before. Too quiet. It wasn't just the absence of trains. There were no crickets chirping, no rustling leaves. Even the air felt still, like the world was holding its breath. As I stepped onto the platform, I noticed something strange. The ground near the tracks looked disturbed, like someone or something had been dragging heavy objects through the gravel. I followed the marks, my flashlight beam trembling in my grip. The tracks stretched out ahead, disappearing into the darkness. The signal lights blinked red in the distance, casting eerie flashes of light over the rails. And then I heard it, a faint whisper. It was soft at first, almost drowned out by the pounding of my heart. But as I moved closer to the tracks, it grew louder. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, layered, overlapping, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. "Hello!" My voice cracked, barely audible over the whispers. The voices stopped. A shiver ran down my spine as the silence pressed in around me. I scanned the area with my flashlight, desperate to see anything that would explain what was happening. That's when I saw the silhouette again. It was closer this time, standing directly on the tracks about 20 feet ahead. The light from my flashlight didn't seem to touch it. It was like the figure absorbed the light, leaving only darkness in its wake. "Stay away!" I shouted, but my voice wavered. The figure didn't move. But then, from the shadows, another one stepped forward. And another. My chest tightened as I realized there wasn't just one silhouette. There were dozens, maybe more. They emerged from the darkness, standing in the gravel near the tracks, their faceless heads all tilted toward me. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to turn and run. The station platform loomed ahead, but as I sprinted toward it, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned. Louder now, urgent and almost angry. "Stop!" I don't know why I said it. I wasn't even sure they would listen. But the moment the word left my mouth, the whispers stopped again. When I turned, the silhouettes were gone. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Faceless, motionless, waiting in the dark. The morning felt surreal, like I was floating through someone else's life. My parents barely noticed my state. They were too busy with their routines. I thought about telling them what I'd seen, but what would I even say? "Hey, Mom, Dad, the hallucinations aren't hallucinations?" I wasn't sure I believed it myself. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon again, the tension in my chest was unbearable. The whispers still echoed in my ears, and my skin prickled with the feeling of being watched, even inside my own home. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go back. This time, I didn't wait until my parents were distracted. I just grabbed my coat and told them I was going for a walk. My mom barely looked up from her book. "Be careful," she said. The train station loomed ahead in the distance, its dim lights flickering like a heartbeat. As I got closer, the air grew colder, heavier. The platform was empty, as always, but it no longer felt deserted. I stood at the edge of the tracks, staring into the black void where the rails disappeared into the night. My breath came in shallow gasps, and my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. "Why are you here?" I whispered. For a moment, there was nothing, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of power lines. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint at first, crunching against the gravel somewhere down the line. But they grew louder, more deliberate, as if someone, or something, was walking straight toward me. I shone my flashlight down the tracks, but the beam only illuminated a narrow sliver of empty rails. The footsteps didn't stop. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. No response. Just the relentless crunch of gravel beneath unseen feet. And then I saw it. The silhouette was back, standing farther down the tracks. This time it wasn't alone. Two more figures flanked it, their shapes just as black and featureless. My stomach churned as I realized something was different. The figures weren't motionless anymore. They were moving. Slowly, deliberately, they began to walk toward me. Their gait was unnatural, jerky, like marionettes being dragged along by invisible strings. My flashlight flickered, the bulb buzzing faintly, and my breath caught in my throat. "Stay back!" I yelled, stumbling backward onto the platform. The figures didn't stop. I turned and ran, my sneakers slapping against the concrete as I bolted toward the street. But even as I sprinted, I could hear them behind me. The footsteps closer now, faster. I didn't dare look back. When I reached the street, the world felt different. The air was warmer, the sounds of the neighborhood alive again. I risked a glance over my shoulder, but the figures were gone. I stood there for a long time, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my ears. And then, for the first time, I noticed something else. The train station wasn't just silent. It was wrong. The lights that had always flickered warmly were now dim, almost completely extinguished. The air smelled acrid, like burnt rubber, and the faint sound of metal creaking drifted through the stillness. I thought about leaving, about running home and locking myself in my room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the silhouettes weren't done with me. And then I saw the writing. Scrawled in the dust on the platform was a single word, etched in jagged, uneven strokes. "Come." I stared at the word in the dust, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Come." The jagged letters seemed almost alive, writhing under the faint light of the platform. I wanted to turn back, to run home and bury myself under the covers. But something kept me rooted in place. It wasn't just fear. It was curiosity, gnawing at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Why me? Why now? The tracks stretched into the distance, disappearing into the mouth of the tunnel at the far end of the line. That tunnel had always unsettled me. Even in the daytime, it seemed to swallow the light, leaving only darkness behind. Now, in the dead of night, it looked like the entrance to another world. The writing seemed to point toward it, as if the silhouettes were trying to guide me, or lure me. I took a deep breath and stepped off the platform, my feet crunching against the gravel as I made my way toward the tunnel. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, but I kept going, drawn forward by some invisible force. The air grew colder with each step. The familiar hum of the station faded, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on me like a weight. When I reached the edge of the tunnel, I hesitated. The darkness was absolute, my flashlight barely making a dent in the black void. The rails stretched into the abyss, glinting faintly in the weak light. I didn't want to go in, but something compelled me to take another step. And another. The whispers started again. They were faint at first, just a soft murmur that seemed to come from the walls of the tunnel itself. But as I ventured deeper, the voices grew louder, more distinct. They weren't speaking English. The words were guttural, twisted, like a language not meant for human ears. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The whispers stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, so thick it felt like it was pressing against my skull. And then I heard the footsteps again. They were behind me this time, echoing off the walls of the tunnel. Slow and deliberate, the sound sent a shiver racing down my spine. I whipped around, shining my flashlight back the way I'd come. The beam of light trembled, revealing nothing but empty tracks. The footsteps stopped. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. I turned back toward the depths of the tunnel, but this time, I wasn't alone. A silhouette stood in the distance, barely visible at the edge of my flashlight's reach. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel it watching me. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. The silhouette tilted its head, as if considering my question. Then it raised an arm and pointed deeper into the tunnel. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I'm not going in there." The whispers returned, louder this time, angry and insistent. They filled my head, drowning out my thoughts, until I couldn't take it anymore. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the voices only grew louder, a cacophony of sound that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. "Stop!" I screamed. The voices fell silent. When I opened my eyes, the silhouette was gone, but the whispers had left something behind. Another word, scratched into the grime on the wall of the tunnel. Wait! The word wait stared back at me from the tunnel wall, its jagged letters cutting through the grime like scars. I took a step back, my flashlight flickering as the oppressive silence pressed in around me. And then I felt it, a faint tremor beneath my feet. It started as a subtle vibration, the kind you'd feel when a train was approaching from far away. But it grew stronger, more distinct, until I could hear the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks echoing through the tunnel. The air grew heavy, electric, as if charged with something unnatural. A faint light appeared at the far end of the tunnel, growing brighter with each passing second. It was a train, but something about it wasn't right. The light was dim and flickering, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. The train moved too quickly, its wheels screeching against the tracks like nails on a chalkboard. I stood frozen as the train hurtled toward me, its shape becoming clearer. It wasn't like any train I'd ever seen. Its cars were rusted and warped, their metal frames groaning with the strain of movement. Windows shattered in jagged shards as it barreled closer, but there was no sound from inside, no passengers. And yet I felt watched. The train didn't slow as it approached. It roared past me, inches from where I stood, the force of its passing nearly knocking me off my feet. I turned, watching as it sped down the tracks toward the station. But then, just as it reached the platform, the train disappeared. It didn't slow. It didn't stop. It simply blinked out of existence, leaving only silence and the faint smell of burning metal behind. I stared at the empty tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell had I just seen? The whispers started again, soft and insistent, like they were urging me forward. My gaze drifted back to the tunnel, where the darkness seemed to pulse with life. "No," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "I'm not going back in there." The whispers grew louder, angrier. I turned on my heel and ran, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted back toward the station. The air felt heavier with every step, like I was pushing against an invisible force. When I finally burst onto the platform, I doubled over, gasping for breath. The station was eerily quiet, its dim lights flickering overhead. I glanced back at the tracks, half expecting to see the silhouettes standing there, waiting. But the tracks were empty. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but then I saw it. Scrawled in the dust on the platform, in the same jagged script as before, were 3 new words: "Come back soon." My blood turned to ice. I backed away from the writing, my legs trembling beneath me. And that's when I noticed the faint shape in the window of the station's waiting room. A silhouette, watching me. The silhouette stood motionless in the window of the station's waiting room, its faceless head tilted as if studying me. The weak light of the platform barely penetrated the grime-covered glass, but I could feel its gaze like a weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't want to go inside. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible. But my feet wouldn't move. The whispers started again, soft and insistent, seeping into my mind like smoke. They weren't coming from the tunnel this time. They were closer, emanating from the waiting room itself. I took a step forward, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The silhouette didn't move, didn't flinch, but the whispers grew louder with every step I took. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The air was cold, bitter, and the faint scent of burning metal lingered like a warning. I pushed the door open. The waiting room was small, barely more than a square of linoleum and plastic chairs. The fluorescent light overhead flickered weakly, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow. The silhouette was gone. I swept my flashlight across the room, half expecting it to reappear in one of the corners. But the space was empty, save for the dust-covered chairs and a timetable pinned to the wall. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It came from the far corner of the room, near the vending machines. Slowly, I edged closer, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would drown out the sound. When I reached the corner, I froze. Carved into the linoleum floor were more jagged letters. This time, they formed a question. "Do you see US?" My breath caught in my throat. The tapping continued, louder now, coming from the vending machine. It was shaking slightly, as if something inside was trying to get out. I stepped closer, against my better judgment, and peered through the glass. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the usual rows of candy bars and soda cans, long expired. But then I noticed the shadows. They weren't natural. They moved, shifting and swirling inside the machine like living things. The whispers grew deafening. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly around the room. That's when I saw them again. Dozens of silhouettes, reflected in the cracked glass of the vending machine. They were behind me. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the dim light. But the room was empty. The reflections in the glass still showed them, standing in a loose circle around me, their faceless heads all tilted in unison. "Leave me alone," I screamed, backing toward the door. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, the whispers stopped. The silence was suffocating, pressing against my ears like a physical force. And then, just as suddenly, the voices returned, a single word cutting through the chaos. "Stay." The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness where you can't even see your own hands. I fumbled for my flashlight, but the whispers were back, rising in a chaotic, overlapping tide. They seemed to come from everywhere, the walls, the floor, even the air itself. "Stay!" The voices hissed, their tone growing sharper, angrier. I swung the flashlight around frantically, but the beam sputtered and died, leaving me completely blind. My chest tightened as panic set in, my breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. Something moved. It wasn't loud, just a faint scuff of a foot against linoleum. But it was close, too close. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The response was a low, guttural sound, like a mix between a growl and a sob. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the floor, my hands searching blindly for anything to defend myself. And then I felt it. A hand. It wasn't warm or soft like a human hand. It was cold, dry, and rough, like the bark of an ancient tree. Fingers wrapped around my wrist, tightening with unnatural strength. I screamed, trying to pull away, but the grip was unrelenting. My other hand flailed in the darkness, finally finding the flashlight. I slammed it against the floor in desperation, and miraculously, the light flickered back on. The hand was gone. The room was empty again, but the silence was somehow worse than the whispers. My flashlight beam trembled as I scanned the space, and that's when I saw it. The writing on the wall. It hadn't been there before, and it wasn't written in dust or carved into the surface. It was smeared in something dark, something that glistened wetly under the flashlight's beam. "Look!" The words stretched across the far wall, jagged and uneven, like it had been scratched out in a hurry. My stomach churned at the metallic tang in the air, and I realized with horror what it might be. Then I noticed the vending machine. Its glass was no longer cracked. It was shattered completely, shards scattered across the floor. And in the empty space where snacks should have been, there was something moving. It was a shadow. No, a mass of shadows, swirling and shifting like a living thing. The whispers rose again, louder now, more frantic. The shadows oozed out of the vending machine, pooling on the floor like ink. Slowly, they began to take shape, rising into figures, faceless, featureless, but unmistakably human. The silhouettes, they moved toward me, their steps slow and deliberate. My back hit the wall, and I realized there was nowhere left to run. "Stay." The voices hissed, the words stretching and distorting as the figures closed in. "No!" I shouted, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. I swung it wildly, the beam slicing through the darkness. The silhouettes flinched, recoiling slightly, but they didn't stop. Desperation clawed at me. I turned the flashlight to its brightest setting, aiming it directly at the nearest figure. The light hit it, and for a brief moment the silhouette froze. Then it dissolved, unraveling like smoke in the wind. The others paused, their heads tilting in unison. I didn't wait for them to recover. I ran for the door, slamming my shoulder against it with everything I had. It didn't budge. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, and the silhouettes began to close in again, their movements faster, more erratic. I swung the flashlight at the window, shattering the glass. Without thinking, I scrambled through the opening, ignoring the sting of glass cutting into my hands and knees. When I hit the ground outside, the whispers stopped. I turned, half expecting to see the silhouettes pouring out of the waiting room after me. But the building was dark and silent, its windows blank and lifeless. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but then I noticed the platform. The writing was back, scrawled in the same jagged script. This time it said, "We follow." I stumbled back from the writing, my hands trembling as the flashlight cast uneven shadows across the platform. "We follow." The words felt like a promise, a warning carved into my mind as much as the ground beneath me. My thoughts raced. Where could I go? The platform stretched on one side, the tracks disappearing into the tunnel on the other. Beyond the station was just the empty street, the distant houses cloaked in darkness. Then I heard the sound again, the distant rumble of a train. First, I thought it was my imagination, but the vibrations beneath my feet grew stronger, and the faint light appeared down the tracks, just as it had before. The train was coming back. My gut told me to run, to get as far away from the tracks as possible. But a part of me, a reckless, desperate part, felt drawn to it. The train was the only thing that seemed to connect all of this. The silhouettes, the whispers, the impossible writing. The light grew brighter, the screech of wheels on steel piercing the night. This time, the train slowed. It came to a stop just past the platform, its rusted metal sides groaning under the strain. The windows, now fully shattered, revealed nothing but darkness inside. I hesitated, my pulse thundering in my ears, and then I saw them. Silhouettes filled the train's windows, their faceless heads pressed against the shattered frames. Their shapes flickered, like static on an old TV, but they were unmistakably there, watching me. The doors slid open with a grating screech. Cold air poured out, thick and suffocating, carrying the faint scent of smoke and decay. The whispers started again, louder now, rising in a chorus that seemed to echo from the depths of the train itself. "Come," they urged, the word drawn out in a haunting chant. I wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of my home and pretend none of this was real. But my legs wouldn't move. It was like the train had some kind of pull, dragging me forward despite my fear. I stepped closer, the flashlight flickering in my hand. The silhouettes in the windows didn't move, but their presence was suffocating, a wall of dark shapes pressing against the edges of my vision. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Come." I peered inside the open door, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows. The interior of the train was worse than I'd imagined. The seats were torn and decayed, their stuffing spilling onto the floor. Rust streaked the walls, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of black sludge that squelched underfoot. But it wasn't empty. The silhouettes were inside, hunched over in the seats, their bodies twitching and shifting unnaturally. They turned toward me as one, their featureless faces tilting in unison. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the whispers. For a moment, the figures froze. The train seemed to hold its breath, the air thick and oppressive. Then one of the silhouettes stood. It was taller than the others, its limbs unnaturally long, its movements jerky and distorted like a broken puppet. It stepped toward the door, its head tilting from side to side as if it were studying me. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the platform. "Stay," the whispers hissed, overlapping and distorted. The silhouette reached out, its arms stretching unnaturally long, fingers clawing at the air between us. I scrambled backward, my breath coming in panicked gasps. And then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the train began to move. The screech of metal on metal filled the air as it pulled away from the platform, the silhouettes inside turning back toward the windows. Their faceless heads followed me, even as the train disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. The whispers faded, leaving only the distant rumble of the train's wheels. I sat there on the platform, shaking and gasping for air, staring into the darkness where the train had vanished. For a moment, I thought it was over, but then I noticed the new writing on the platform, scrawled in jagged letters. Next time, no escape. The words burned into my mind. Next time, no escape. The message was clear, they weren't done with me. I didn't want to stick around to find out what next time meant. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to stand, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. The station was deathly silent again, the air thick and still. I turned and bolted for the street, my sneakers pounding against the platform. The whole world seemed darker than before, as though the station had drained the light from everything around it. When I reached home, I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my hands trembling so badly it took 3 tries. My parents were asleep, of course they were, and the house felt unnervingly quiet. I crept up to my room, my breath still ragged. As I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window, I told myself I was done. I wouldn't go back to the station. I wouldn't let curiosity or desperation drag me into that nightmare again. But the station had other plans. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when the noise woke me. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. The faint sound of a train whistle, long and mournful, drifting through the night. Then I heard it again, louder this time, cutting through the stillness like a warning. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The whistle wasn't coming from the station. It was closer, much closer. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the faint rumble of wheels on tracks. My room vibrated, the glass panes of the window rattling softly. I peered outside, but the street was empty. And then I saw it, a faint glow, flickering like an old film reel moving past my window. The shape of a train, rusted, broken, and impossibly quiet, rolled down an invisible set of tracks, passing just feet from my house. Silhouettes filled the windows, their heads turning toward me as the train passed. I backed away from the glass, my pulse thundering in my ears. The train slowed, the flickering light illuminating the darkness of my room. I could feel them watching me, even without faces. And then the whistle blew again. It wasn't just a sound. It was a summons, pulling at me, dragging me forward. My legs moved without my permission, carrying me toward the window, then down the stairs. By the time I reached the front door, I was shaking uncontrollably. But the pull was too strong to resist. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The train had stopped just beyond the edge of the yard, its decayed frame glowing faintly in the dark. The doors slid open. The silhouettes inside turned toward me, their heads tilting in eerie unison. "No," I whispered, but my voice was lost in the wind. The whispers began again, faint but insistent, carried on the breeze. They weren't coming from the train this time. They were everywhere, circling me like a predator sizing up its prey. The pull grew stronger, dragging me toward the open doors. My feet moved on their own, crunching against the dead grass as I crossed the yard. "Don't," I begged, though I wasn't sure if I was pleading with the train or myself. As I reached the edge of the platform, the train shuddered, its rusted frame groaning. The whispers swelled to a deafening roar, and I felt something cold wrap around my arm, like the hand from before, but stronger, more insistent. "Come." The voices hissed, overlapping in a distorted chant. I froze, my body trembling as the whispers filled my mind, drowning out my own thoughts. And then, from somewhere deep inside me, I found the strength to fight back. "No!" I screamed, yanking my arm free and stumbling backward. The whispers faltered, the pull loosening its grip. The silhouettes inside the train twitched, their movements erratic, almost frantic. The train began to move again, its wheels screeching against invisible tracks. The silhouettes turned to face me one last time, their featureless heads tilting in what almost looked like disappointment. And then, with a final, haunting whistle, the train disappeared into the night. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. The whispers were gone, and the night was silent once more. But as I sat there, trembling in the cold, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The train had come for me once, and it would come again. The door behind me slammed shut, and the room went completely dark. The days that followed felt like living in a haze. My parents didn't notice anything was wrong, or maybe they just didn't want to. I didn't tell them about the train or the silhouettes. What would I even say? That my hallucinations weren't hallucinations at all, but something far worse? I tried to move on, to pretend none of it had happened. But I couldn't. Not really. Every night, I lay awake, straining to hear the faint whistle or the rumble of wheels in the distance. The whispers haunted my dreams, pulling me back to the station, to the train. And then, 2 nights ago, the writing appeared again. I found it on my bedroom wall, scrawled in jagged, uneven letters. Last chance. I didn't know what it meant, but deep down, I knew the train was coming back. Tonight, the air feels different. Heavy, electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm. I sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the clock as it ticks toward midnight. My flashlight rests beside me, though I'm not sure it'll do any good. When the whistle comes, long and mournful, I'm not surprised. The vibration starts a moment later, faint but unmistakable, rattling the glass in my window. I stand, my legs shaky, and make my way downstairs. This time, I don't fight it. The train is waiting in the street, just like before. Its rusted frame glows faintly, the shattered windows filled with silhouettes. The doors slide open with a groan, and the whispers begin again, rising and falling in a haunting chant. Come. I step outside, the cold air biting at my skin. The pull is stronger now, more insistent. I know I can't run. I cross the yard, my heart pounding, and step onto the invisible platform. The air grows colder, heavier, as I approach the open doors. The whispers swell, wrapping around me like a shroud. For a moment I hesitate, then I step inside. The train jerks forward, the doors sliding shut behind me with a metallic clang. The silhouettes shift in their seats, turning their faceless heads toward me. The whispers are deafening now, a chorus of voices that fills every corner of the train. The floor beneath me is slick and cold, the black sludge clinging to my shoes. The air smells of rust and decay, thick and suffocating. I move forward, my steps hesitant, as the train barrels into the darkness. The windows are filled with nothing but black, as if the outside world no longer exists. The whispers grow quieter as I reach the center of the car. And then, one by one, the silhouettes vanish. The train is empty now. I sit in one of the decayed seats, my hands trembling. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the faint creak of the train's metal frame. Then, from the darkness ahead, a figure steps forward. It's not like the others. This one is taller, its limbs impossibly long, its movements smoother, more deliberate. Its faceless head tilts as it approaches, and for the first time, I feel something beyond fear. Recognition. The figure stops in front of me, its presence overwhelming. The whispers return, faint and fragmented, forming words that chill me to my core. You belong here. I open my mouth to protest, to scream, but no sound comes out. The figure reaches out, its hand impossibly cold as it touches my shoulder. The train shudders, and the darkness outside the windows shifts. For the first time, I see where we're going. It's not a place. It's not even a destination. It's an absence, a void that stretches on forever. And as the train hurtles toward it, I realize the truth. The train wasn't coming for me. It was taking me back to where I'd always belonged. I don't know how long I've been here now. The train never stops, never slows. The silhouettes are gone, and the whispers have faded, leaving only the hum of the wheels on endless tracks. Sometimes, I see lights in the distance, flickering like a memory, but they're always just out of reach. If you ever hear the whistle or feel the vibration beneath your feet, don't go to the station. Don't answer the pull, because once you board the train, there's no getting off.